Okay, so this is just a quick attempt to use the medium of video to explain why we might be less concerned about pandemic potential of a disease like monkeypox than the novel coronavirus. And so what I'm going to do is start by defining some things. So I'm going to define R0, very famous quantity in epidemiology, which is the number of secondary infections per primary with no intervention. Yep. I'm going to let theta be the proportion of transmission that is asymptomatic, and I'm going to let epsilon be the proportion of symptomatics that isolate and I'm going to let R be the secondary infections per primary with intervention, with isolation, yeah? Okay, so that's with case isolation. And what we can then sort of think through by standard reasoning is that this R number is going to equal R0, and then if we're just isolating people who are symptomatic, we can't do anything about the fraction of infection that is inherently asymptomatic, but we can, for the fraction that is symptomatic, isolate this number curly E. And so this is our equation. Now let's think about how this works for something COVID-ish, okay? Well, we estimated that R0 might have been around 3, yeah? So mathematicians use this curly line for like, sort of in very much, very, very approximate, not even a proper approximation. In a sense, theta we thought might have been about 1/3, and let's suppose that about 2/3 of people could isolate, and that means that R was approximately 3 times 1/3 plus 2/3 times 1/3, so that's 1 2/3. And the issue is that's bigger than 1, right? So just this kind of level of transmission plus this level of symptomatic and asymptomatic and isolation is troublesome, right? Whereas if we think about monkeypox-ish, okay? Now we're really, really very uncertain about what our naught might be, but if we assume that it's close to, say, 1.1, so only just above 1, then we think the amount of transmission that happens before infection, again, is probably going to be less than 1/3. But let's suppose it's 1/3. And that because it's much more serious and distinctive, we get very high levels of people able to isolate. So let's suppose that's 0.9. Yeah. Then R is going to be more like 1.1 times 1/3 plus 2/3 times 0.1. Yeah, and this is going to be less than 1, right? So it's this kind of back of the envelope calculation that epidemiologists are doing that is making us less worried. It's to do with the amount of asymptomatic and the amount of isolation that it's possible to do. And of course, we'll need to update these numbers as we go along.